Hi there, I'm Will, and welcome to my cube sound design and implementation demo reel. First, I created a table which would help me track all of the sounds that I would need and gave me brief ideas on how I might achieve them. Following on from this, it made the most sense to start with the sounds for the player traversing the map because these were the easiest to do. The map has tile, concrete, sand and dirt surfaces, so I began by recording footsteps for those. For sand and dirt, I crunched a sandbag in my hand. For tile, I recorded my own footsteps on our tile floor, and for concrete, I simply brought my mic outside and recorded footsteps on the concrete out there. Next was a player jumping and falling. I recorded my own voice for the sound of the player jumping, and for falling, I recorded myself dropping some fabric and laid that with some footsteps for more impact. For added detail, I used my footstep switch container so that if the player landed on a certain surface, they would hear the appropriate footsteps on landing. After a long period of fighting and taking damage, the player may become low on health. I first created a heartbeat loop by tapping my microphone, which would play upon loading of the map, but would be muted until the player's health drops below 30, at which point a linear volume increase would occur as the player's health drops further. Eventually, the player may succumb to their injuries. To add depth to the player's death, I used states to low pass the mix whilst the player is down. After this, I moved on to items, of which, in addition to the 4 basic gems, the game has 3. Wizard Armor, which looks like a hat, Wizard Health, which looks like a potion, and a Super Gem. For the sound of the armour, I dropped some clothes onto a duvet, which when processed gave the impression of the wizard putting on the hat. For the health potion, I recorded myself pulling a cork from a gin bottle to achieve the sound of the potion being opened, and once this was done, I created corresponding musical chimes to accompany this and the wizard armour sound. This makes the sounds more distinguishable when the player is busy in battle. Throughout this project, I kept all my musical sounds in a key of D flat major so that they complement each other when heard in tandem. Next, I made the sound of the player collecting the 4 gems. I made this by filling a container, which I padded out with a towel, with small rocks. I proceeded to drop other rocks into this container, and the resulting noise sounds like the player taking the rocks in their hands, which, during the process, the gems will collide and make noise. Following on from this, it only made sense to do the weapons next. I started by building explosions and gusts of wind in a synthesizer, as well as recording whooshes and fire imitations using cardboard and plastic. Of the 4 gems, the lightning gem was the simplest. I felt an explosion would fit it best, given that it fires lightning bolts, and this was done entirely in a synthesizer. On the contrary, the fire gem was the hardest, and it had 3 parts. The whoosh of the fireball being launched, the noise of the ball in flight, and the explosion made an impact. For the launching of the fireball, I layered my whooshing sounds with my artificial fire, which would sound like embers lingering in the air. For the flight of the fireball, I simply used lightly processed white noise that would pan in accordance to its position in relation to the player, and the same goes for the explosion, which was made in a synthesizer and laid with samples of fireworks. Next was a poison gem, where I got creative with a synthesizer, making laser type sounds, and I laid these with recordings of subtle water splashes to give it a wet sound. Finally for the gems came the ice gem. This gem shoots a gust of wind, so it only felt appropriate to create some whooshes using both synthesizers and recordings. Eventually, once used to exhaustion, the gems lose their power, and I wanted this to sound like the staff misfiring, which I imagined would sound a little like electricity coursing through the end of the staff. If the player cannot replenish their gems, they can also fight close range by swinging their staff at enemies. To create the sound for this, I wafted a cardboard tube past my microphone. When the player runs out of power in one gem, they may switch to another. For this sound, I imagined a magical and breathy noise. Lastly for weapons was the Super Gem, which can be collected by the player as a temporary power-up. The Super Gem has 3 sounds, the first being the alert that plays when it's collected, another alert when it expires, and a chime which acts as a layer to the original weapon sounds, beefing them up. To define what sounds play and when, I used a state controlled by an event. When the item is collected, an event sets the Super Gem state as active and plays the Super Gem pickup alert. Whilst active, a Super Gem magic event is used to play the additional magic layer along with the usual magic sounds. Once the gem expires, an event is used to change the state parameter and to play the expiration alert, letting the player know that they no longer have the Super Gem. Finally, I made the sounds for the creatures. Firstly was the Slith, which I imagined would talk to the player telepathically and try to imitate and deceive them. I recorded my own voice and used reverb tails to create a dreamlike sound that would catch the player's attention, and in total I made 4 phrases that would try to persuade the player from killing this enemy. The rhino is small and moves erratically, making it hard to hit and sometimes to see. I also found that it seems to have small metal feet, which I imagined would scrape as it moved. Due to this, I created its own set of footsteps, which would also help to warn the player of their presence, making them more noticeable. For the goblin, ogre, Ratamahatta and rhino, I used noises from foxes, lions, alligators and pigs respectively, which I processed imaginatively to create the sounds for these beasts. Baul is the hardest enemy to kill and is also very large. I created new footsteps and then set up a dedicated reverb auxiliary so that the booming footsteps really echo throughout the environment. For its cry, I laid a mixture of animals along with a high-pitched fox cry, which when frequency shifted down sounds like a person screaming, helping it to feel more demonic. Finally, during some of the levels the player may become submerged in water. I created a player in water state, which when active applies a near global low pass of the mix, with the only sounds remaining unaffected being the theme and the slith, given that the slith talks to the player telepathically. When the player is no longer submerged, I created a gradual transition to imitate the sound of the water leaving the player's ears. Okay, thank you for watching, and I hope this leads you to consider me for future endeavours. Goodbye.